The city of Glasgow is currently host to the 26th Conference of the Parties, better known as COP26 UN Climate Change Conference. To mark this important event, the University of Glasgow is hosting a range of events exploring different aspects of how our research can tackle the causes and impacts of climate change. And the School of Interdisciplinary Studies is playing a full part in that. It has established itself as a creative, research-intensive university environment and an inclusive centre of excellence for interdisciplinary learning and teaching. It is committed to supporting the economic growth of the south of Scotland and in so doing works across the spectrum from local to global, in niche areas that are both matched to location and have national and international applicability. Research in the social sciences engages across the full breadth of climate issues. And for more than 50 years, that research has helped inform our understanding of the human drivers of climate change and, more recently, of how our behaviours can contribute to achieving net zero. Today, we are showcasing the work of our school, the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, where colleagues' specialisms include the environmental impacts of economic growth, the impacts of climate change on inequalities, including poverty and food security, nature-based solutions, risk reduction, resilience of coastal systems, and the list goes on. The recordings that follow give an indication of the strength, breadth, and depth of those international connections. They were gathered by my colleague, Professor Cecilia Tortajada, Professor in Practice at the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, and include ministers, heads of international organisations, presidents of international water associations, and leading academics from different parts of the world, who gathered in Glasgow on 28th and 29th October to discuss water security challenges under climate change. On behalf of the University of Glasgow School of Interdisciplinary Studies, I thank each participant for giving their time to make these recordings in order to share their views on one of the most immediate climate change issues facing the world and facing it right now.
Hello everyone. Greetings from the International Water Resources Association. My name is Gabriel Eckstein and I'm the current president of this association. It is an immense pleasure to address you in this video on the occasion of our engagement with the Conference of the Parties of the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference taking place in Glasgow, Scotland. We are at a critical moment in human history. Our global climate change is changing faster than it has in thousands of years, and that change is having a significant consequence on species and habitats, the human environment, our social, economic, and political systems, and on people's lives. Unprecedented droughts, floods, and other disasters are becoming more common around the world, and the climate crisis that started decades ago is now more visible than ever. The water cycle is the primary medium through which we feel the effects of climate change. Between 2001 and 2018, nearly 3/4 of all natural disasters globally were water-related. Higher temperatures and more extreme and less predictable weather conditions are already having serious impacts on global water security. It affects the availability and distribution of rain, snowmelt, river flows, and groundwater on local, regional, and global scales. It also affects water quality and makes access to safe drinking water considerably more challenging, especially in communities that are already vulnerable to water insecurity. Thus, water will play a pivotal role in how the world mitigates and adapts to the effects of climate change. Under the current global climate crisis, where water resources are at the core, the only way forward is to work together and reinforce our commitment to address this global challenge. We at the International Water Resource Association recognize this reality and are ready to contribute to this important effort. We pride ourselves on offering an open and collaborative platform for experts and professionals from dozens of disciplines to convene around the numerous water-related challenges facing our world. And knowing that we need to strengthen the interface between practice, science, and policy, we have made it a core mission of the association to facilitate that interaction and to engage water professionals and policymakers in productive dialogue and partnerships. As one of our many initiatives to address water issues in the context of climate change, the association has established a task force on water and climate change to bring members together to work on this critical global issue. The task force draws from experience of its nearly 3,000 members and is currently working on topics related to climate change and water pollution, energy and water, flood risk management, forests and water, and mountains and water impacts in plains. The group is contributing to the science by coordinating and facilitating the publication of special journal issues, organizing a session at COP26, preparing policy briefs, and arranging informational webinars. Enhancing understanding, fostering networking and promoting capacity building, research and information exchanges around water resources is now more crucial than ever. The participation of the International Water Resources Association in COP26 is now especially noteworthy as we celebrate the association's 50th anniversary. Over the past 5 decades since it was founded, the association has become an impressive network of nearly 3,000 water professionals, researchers, educators, policy influencers, and managers from more than 130 countries around the globe. Our membership is now firmly committed to exchanging knowledge and collaborating with others on local to global water issues, especially as it pertains to climate change, and to engage not only with words, but also with concrete actions. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this global movement of governments, companies, NGOs, educational institutions, and individuals who are convinced that a better world is possible and that we can better coordinate efforts to save our planet. On behalf of the International Water Resources Association, I wish you a wonderful conference, and I look forward to continuing our contribution at all levels. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Sydney Wallace-Lage, President of the Water Business for Black & Veatch. Drought, flood, water equity, food scarcity, societal strife, environmental disruption. These words and many more conjure the images of the situations that we are facing around the globe due to climate change. And the visual impacts are just now being acknowledged. Think about all of the unseen and unknown damage that our planet has endured. We've had warning bells. They started as small handbells in a bell choir. And over the past few decades, we have moved to bigger and stronger bells. The most recent IPCC report jumped from the handbells to the church bell ringing strong and loud across the land. The language has changed, from using softer terms and various degrees of certainty to strong language, such as unequivocal, and clearly stating the impact of human activity on changing the climate. Climate change has significant impact on our most precious resource, water. Communities see changes in rainfall around the globe, too much water or too little water. The intensity of storms exceeds our infrastructure's capacity to manage the water without seeing damage from flooding. The lack of rainfall creates a shortfall for existing communities to meet water demands and impacts their economic survival. Our environment is compromised due to changes in water quality, temperature shifts, and the interruption to ecosystems. And the most vulnerable populations pay an even bigger price due to social and water inequity issues. Water plays a fundamental role in uniting our communities. It stitches together industries, businesses, and residents in a way that no other sector does. The water sector has the opportunity to touch everyone on our planet. We can drive regulatory policy, we can influence government actions, we inspire creativity, and we can be the catalyst needed to drive change. Our focus must be to create sustainable and resilient communities, and that requires a systems thinking approach. To achieve the infrastructure resilience needed to manage and mitigate the impacts of climate change, population growth, economic and societal movements, we must envision a future that builds on today, yet provides a trajectory that is unlike our past. As a result, we must develop a forward-looking roadmap focused on mitigating the impacts of climate change, population growth, and economic and societal movements. We must start the resiliency journey of our water infrastructure by recognizing the factors that have hindered advancement so that we can address them as well as separate our decisions from historical thinking. These are factors such as political will, affordability, water quality, risk tolerance, and long-term investment commitments. These have often interrupted our progress by not holding true to what we need to do. Without overcoming these factors, the resilience required will not be accomplished. To build that roadmap requires an enhanced or a different approach from the past. We can no longer look inwardly and truly evolve. The future requires us to think holistically, beyond our own boundaries, and understand the big picture. What gives us the best value? How do we manage our water infrastructure as well as its connection to other infrastructures more holistically? How do we mitigate climate change, and where do we adapt? What influence can we have? What are the opportunities? Our success is predicated on being collaborative. What is the best ecosystem to innovate and bring new ideas to market faster? We cannot be myopic. We need to break down silos within our sector and with other sectors so that we can seek to accelerate new ideas and their delivery in a more collaborative relationship. We need to get good at reaching across the aisles to hear new ideas and to work together to find the best solutions. Our resilience requires us to think transformationally. Like being collaborative and breaking down silos for the acceleration of new ideas, we need to challenge conventional paradigms of repeating the past and instead seek new approaches. Our resilience is predicated on systems thinking and our ability to do long-range planning for our water infrastructure and its connectivity to other infrastructure. We must consider a phased and integrated implementation of bringing in innovative engineering and also recapturing nature-based approaches. Taking decisive action, working together, planning and operating systems holistically, investing in innovative and creative strategies to mitigate our impacts, sharing our success, leading by example, and driving regulatory policy and governmental action are all actions that we can take now to stem the tide of climate change and realize a future that is healthy, that is sustainable, that is resilient, and that is equitable. Our responsibility expands beyond water and to the entire planet, to the health of natural ecosystems and biospheres, to ocean life and human prosperity. We, the people of this planet, are the connection that brings everyone together. Now is the time for action. Our children and future generations depend on us to act now. I hope that you can step forward and join me and Black & Veatch to make a difference.
Greetings, my name is Philippe Rohner. I'm founder and managing partner of ABIC Partners LLC, a group of independent advisors that cater to both businesses and not-for-profit organizations, providing a social economic perspective to address the needs of decision makers. The School of Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Glasgow has kindly asked me to share my thoughts on the role of business and financial institutions on climate change adaptation and mitigation. Allow me to begin with a quote from Nicholas Stern, a British economist who formerly served at the World Bank. Quote, "The coming few years are of vital importance to the future stability of the world economy and environment. This is a decisive period as we have seen since the Second World War." Quote close. For those looking for international agreements to address global challenges, they should look no further than Bretton Woods, formerly known as the UN Monetary and Financial Conference, as an exemplary case of a single conference that led to the fully negotiated order intended to govern relations between nation states. That said, one should remind themselves that Bretton Woods collapsed in 1971 after being created in 1944, undone by both flaws in its basic structure, not being flexible enough, and the unwillingness of key sovereign members, particularly the US, to follow its rules. It is a stark reminder that governments ultimately are accountable to their electorates. On financial institutions, two financial institutions rise from the Bretton Woods and these are the IMF and the World Bank. But it's important to note that funding comes from member states and therefore national tax revenue budgets. On businesses, they exist because they can address today's needs. However, some wish to see business to go beyond their traditional roles from just creating employment and delivering products and services that consumers are willing to purchase today. Their view is that business also needs to address issues that have a longer-term policy outcome, namely extreme inequality and climate change currently. On social economic factors, deregulations, removal of trade barriers at the beginning of the 1980s resulted not only in accelerated globalization, but also released the destructive created forces that change often brings with it. For one, it shaped the role of businesses. At about the same time, these destructive creative forces accelerate the growth of a nascent industry developed to cater to retail and institutional investors that wish to see their savings and pensions grow in value over time. This added further pressure on businesses to focus on maximizing financial returns and left little scope for business to dwell on a role beyond what their immediate products and services could provide. Activist groups and governments increasingly remind us that businesses have a broader responsibility towards society and environment at large in which they operate. However, expecting a quick reversal in the paradigm that has been in existence for 40 years will take more time than most expect. The Yellow Jacket movement in France and the recent increase in fossil fuel prices remind us that any transition needs to be less contentious. At the same time, asset managers have been asked to allocate a greater part of its $100 trillion under management to supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation goals. However, they are intermediaries, and thus they have the legal fiduciary duty, usually financially, to act on the interests of the beneficiary. I close by asking, what is the role of government when it comes to climate change adaptation mitigation? Is it to promote and subsidize policy outcomes, or to be a facilitator for businesses and financial institutions to meet those policy objectives? I sense governments are still diverting too much attention away from their own leadership responsibilities in this process. Business and financial institutions seek political and economic stability. Hopefully, COP26 draws a roadmap that provides the political economic stability through a roadmap that both is robust, inclusive, and coherent. I thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Stephen Usher and I'm the ESG Manager and Deputy Editor of the International Journal on Hydropower and Dams. I'm also the UK representative on the Climate Change Technical Committee of the International Commission on Large Dams. In this short talk today, I'd like to discuss the challenges and opportunities of climate change and how they relate to the role of hydropower from two perspectives. Firstly, I'll offer some background on the global role of hydropower as an energy source, including its contribution to a clean and renewable energy mix. Secondly, I'll look more closely at the role of hydropower actors and how companies and organisations can position themselves to take a lead in addressing climate change. Through my role at the International Journal on Hydropower and Dams, I work with the world's leading developers and financiers and suppliers in dam and reservoir design, construction and operation. Through this network, we're able to synthesise a comprehensive overview of global hydro development, and each year we publish the annual atlas that provides detailed country-level data as well as aggregated global overview. Just a few days ago in September, we published the 2021 edition of the atlas, and I'm very pleased to be able to share some of those findings with you today. Our World Survey on Hydro Potential and Development this year, based on country reports compiled from around 180 nations, demonstrates a steady rise in world hydro capacity, which now stands at around 1,238 gigawatts. generation from hydropower has increased to at least 4,460 terawatt hours per year, and about 120 gigawatts of new hydro capacity is currently under construction. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause huge suffering and disruption, and the populations of many countries remain, sadly, largely unvaccinated. Impacts in the past year on progress at some dams and hydro projects were inevitable, but as usual, the hydro profession has demonstrated its resilience to adversity and simply added a global pandemic to the other challenges faced, like the increasingly evident impacts of climate change. The country reports in this year's Atlas demonstrate many positive trends that can assist in climate change mitigation and adaptation. These include the increasing development and application of artificial intelligence, particularly high-tech systems for monitoring the safety of dams and power stations, as well as forecasting future hydrological patterns. There are numerous examples of new interconnections between nations, one being the linkage between Chad and Cameroon, and for South Sudan, where the connection with the 600 megawatt Karuma plant in Uganda is now complete. There's increasing ambitious targets in so many nations for the transition to renewable energy, to supply most or even all their power requirements over the next 10, 20 or 30 years, and the interconnection of grid networks will play a key role in achieving this. There's a vast amount of pump storage under development or being retrofitted at existing hydro stations in almost all regions of the world to maximise the benefits of intermittent renewables. Perhaps the most important trend is the vastly increasing recognition of the role that hydropower and water infrastructure will play in the post-COVID recovery period, and in the transition to clean energy across the planet. The slogan "Building Back Better," so frequently used by politicians, has a special significance for hydropower. While solar and wind power programmes race ahead, as they certainly need to, hydropower, as well as complementing these, has the unique capability to offer so many additional benefits. Water storage for domestic and industrial supply and to strengthen food security through irrigation, the control of major waterways from floods and droughts, and in some areas improvements to navigation through well-regulated waterways. Natural hazards such as the tangible effects of climate change have continued to be prevalent in the past year, from extremes of heat and catastrophic forest fires in the western USA, Australia and parts of Central Europe, to prolonged drought in Algeria, where the country's second largest reservoir has just 6% of its storage capacity. These underline again the need for adequate water storage. In contrast, there's been intense flooding in parts of Asia, including the Philippines and China, and in Europe, including Germany and here in the UK. So while hydropower evidently makes a huge contribution to the renewable energy mix, and in total more than 60% of all generation from renewable sources is in the form of hydropower, it's also clear that the role of dams in addressing climate change extends far beyond hydropower alone and includes flood and drought mitigation, water supply and sanitation, irrigation, and even wildlife and wetland habitat creation. In this second part of the talk, I now look at why and how companies and organisations and even individuals working in the hydropower sector can and should position themselves to address climate change. Environmental, social and governance (ESG) factors present a range of key risks and opportunities that are of material consequence to the long-term financial performance and viability of organisations in the hydropower industry. For example, as precipitation volume and intensity is expected to increase in some regions, the risk of a dam overtopping or failing might also increase if the design criteria of a structure does not reflect the changing inflow conditions. There's also legal and financial risk to a company for failing to satisfy emerging and strengthening climate-related legislation. More broadly, if ESG due diligence measures are not adopted and integrated through a strategic methodology by a company's senior management and board, investors and financial intermediaries are increasingly raising the cost of capital investments. The growth of ESG-focused asset investment has accelerated markedly in recent years. In the 7 or so years since I published my MBA dissertation on this subject, assets under management in ESG exchange-traded funds have grown from approximately $7 billion to more than $120 billion currently. Growth has been supported by a clear recognition of the importance of ESG. More than 87% of the international hydro industry respondents who participated in my dissertation survey strongly agreed with the statement that appropriate strategic management of sustainability issues at my organisation will be a significant factor in our performance over time. At the end of last year, Larry Fink, head of BlackRock, which is the world's largest provider of exchange-traded funds, said the climate transition presents an historic investment opportunity. More than 126 governments have made some sort of pledge to achieve net zero emissions. And in addition to national government commitments, companies with market capitalizations totaling more than $12.5 trillion have committed to net zero targets. Various firms operating in the hydropower sector have recently set their own carbon neutral and net zero targets. These include Statkraft, Stantec, Jacobs and Mott MacDonald. In most G20 jurisdictions, companies with public debt or equity have a legal obligation to disclose material risks in their financial reports, including climate-related risks. The Financial Stability Board established the industry-led Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, to design a set of recommendations for consistent disclosures. The TCFD divides climate-related risks into two major categories: risks related to the transition to a lower carbon economy and risks related to the physical impacts of climate change. Transitioning to a lower carbon economy may entail extensive policy, legal, technology and market changes to address mitigation and adaptation requirements related to climate change. Transition risks may pose varying levels of financial and reputational risks to organisations. On the other hand, physical risks resulting from climate change can be event-driven and acute, or chronic long-term shifts in climate patterns. Physical risks may have financial implications for organisations, such as direct damage to assets and indirect impacts from supply chain disruption. And so, in conclusion, it's clear that sustainable hydropower as a sector will continue to perform multifaceted roles in mitigating and adapting to climate change. In addition to this, at the company level, there's increasing legal, civil and financial demand for firms within the sector to position themselves as ESG leaders by committing to, amongst many other factors, reduce carbon emissions, changes to manufacturing processes, shifts in supply chains and even the reorientation of existing business models. And with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I wish you every success with your own work in this critically important field.
Hello, my name is David Molden, former Director General of ICIMOD, former DDG of EME, and now Chair of the Task Force on Climate Change of the International Water Resources Association. And I'd like to talk some about climate change and water with examples from the high Himalaya. But first, just a few points. First, we have to get water higher on the agenda of COP and the climate change discussions. A lot of times we talk about energy, livelihoods, environment, and water, the thread that links everything, is kind of left aside. Second, we have to already take urgent action for many of the poor people on the front line of climate change. I know, and I'll give an example of that from the mountains. And third, we have to focus on solutions. We have solutions. We have to get investments in solutions and policies that support solutions. To bring an example from ICIMOD, where I worked for 9 years. ICIMOD serves mountains and people across 8 countries. In many ways, it seems like a faraway place, but actually what happens in the mountains impacts us all. Mountains are rich in resources, diversity, and culture, but they are also a place of poverty and sometimes conflict. Now, an iconic climate change picture is that of glaciers and snow, and that has caught the world's attention in polar region and also in high mountains. And I'm happy to say that over the last 10 or 15 years, there is much more understanding about the glaciers melting in the Himalaya than there was about some years ago. And actually the picture is dire and it's worrisome. While we know a lot more about glaciers, we are still making an effort to understand what this means for people and environment downstream, and importantly, what to do about it. The consequences of climate change in the mountain are potentially huge, with about 2 billion people relying on the rivers fed by the mountains in very densely populated areas of the Indo-Gangetic Plains and Yellow and Yangtze River basins. The biggest impact of climate change would be on mountain people who rely directly on mountain resources. While mountain people are incredibly resilient, their limits are already being met, with water supplies from snow and glaciers totally vanishing in some areas, and the threat from glacier lake outburst floods, cloudburst floods, landslides, and avalanches on the increased in other areas. Mountains are home for hydropower. Now more questions as arise as hydropower is threatened with changes in flow and disasters. The recent disaster at Chamoli in Uttarakhand, India, with floods damaging hydropower facilities, was a wake-up call to take into consideration climate change. Mountain rivers, mostly transboundary, feed huge irrigated areas important for food security, and mountain water is the source for many megacities in the areas, the big cities in China, Delhi, Lahore, and Dhaka. Already the region is prone to flooding and droughts. Certainly food and water security is at risk. Let me come back to the question, what do we do about it? Where do we go with this? And first is that we have to limit global warming. We have to keep within that 1.5 degree limit. And that is a complex task in the business of COP. But besides that, we have to start focusing on water. And first, we have to work with communities and work with their water issues around the world. And I was happy, for example, in Pakistan, when we were able to work with communities to deliver water by solar pumping while they were losing their water from glacier-fed sources. Also, communities on the front line of climate change face increasing risk of disasters, right? Floods, droughts, landslides. And we have to pay special attention to disaster risk reduction. Second is there's a lot of unknowns going into the future, and we really do have to bring our best science to bear and to bring this into policy and into action. And third, there is hope in the sense that climate change can bring us together. And I saw this in the mountains of the Hindu Kush Himalaya. Countries were working together to understand better what was happening with climate change. Scientists were working together across borders and discussing with their policymakers. And it's this cooperation, this moving forward together, that will ultimately get us through this crisis. With that, I would like to thank you all.
Hi everybody, my name's Simon Parsons, and I'm a director at Scottish Water, the national water company here in Scotland. So first off, I'd just really like to welcome you to Scotland and to the fantastic city of Glasgow. And I do hope, as part of your visit here to COP26, use an opportunity to visit some of our other fantastic cities and some of the really unique rural landscape of Scotland. So as a national water company for Scotland, we are really dependent on a healthy environment to provide the services to our customers, whether that be the really high quality, great tasting drinking water that comes out of the taps, or actually the environment that allows us to treat society's waste and recycle it to the environment. So today we protect our most precious natural resources, the fresh clean water and the blue and green spaces that very much sit at the heart of our national pride. But we're also an energy intensive business with a growing number of ageing assets that can't cope with the extremes of weather our nation is already facing. So that's why this workshop is so important for us, to really understand and learn from others' experience of how to adapt to a changing climate, but also how we can better play our part in mitigating our contribution to climate change. So I'm very much looking forward to the workshop and to hearing much more about everybody's experiences.